In the early hours of April 15th, the British passenger liner RMS Titanic, owned by the White Star Line, collided with an iceberg on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City. At the time, some believed the ship to be practically unsinkable because of her system of watertight compartments, of which 4 could be flooded and she would still remain afloat. However, the iceberg tore a series of holes along the side of the hull, flooding 6 compartments, which sealed the ship's fate. Less than 3 hours after the collision, Titanic lay at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Or did it? There's a rather interesting conspiracy out there that states that Titanic was actually swapped with her sister Olympic and that she was purposely sank as a part of an insurance scam. Oh yes. Hello there Internet, it's Myles here. Now, as I've previously said, no event of any significance takes place in the world without generating a flutter of conspiracy speculation, and Titanic, one of the most iconic ships ever to sail, with its tragedy known worldwide, is no exception. Some believe that it was sank not by an iceberg, but by a torpedo from a German submarine. Others, and this is my favourite by the way, believe that a cursed mummy that the Titanic was carrying is responsible for the collision. According to folklore, the artefact, which acquired the popular nickname the Unlucky Mummy, has brought nothing but misfortune to those who come into contact with it. However, the British Museum say not only is there no truth to this, but rather than resting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, the Unlucky Mummy, which actually isn't a mummy at all, is currently on display in their Egyptian section. But by far the most popular conspiracy out there regarding the Titanic comes from this chap here, Robin Gardner, and his book Titanic, the Ship That Never Sank, where he theorises, as I said at the beginning, that Titanic was actually swapped with Olympic and that she was purposely sank as an insurance scam. To say reading the book is tedious would be a huge understatement. It is quite possibly one of the most boring conspiracy books I've ever read. Now the reason for that is because it is mostly filler. Only a very small percentage of this book is actually dedicated to the actual conspiracy. And I think that's to hide the fact that there isn't hardly any evidence for this conspiracy. To show you how boring it is, look at this. There's an entire page dedicated to the provisions on board the Titanic, which has nothing to do with the conspiracy.
800 cases shelled walnuts, Titanic?
Yes.
3,000 dozen fresh eggs, Titanic?
Yes.
It's all Titanic, this.
All Titanic.
The book theorises that a switch took place after Olympic was damaged in 1911, when it collided with the HMS Hawke. The collision happened as the two ships were sailing parallel to one another, when, according to the subsequent Royal Navy inquiry, the Hawke was pulled towards Olympic due to her large displacement. The Hawke's bow, which was designed to sink ships by ramming into them, punctured Olympic's starboard side, both above and below the water, flooding 2 of her watertight compartments and twisting her propeller shaft. Engineers spent 2 weeks patching her up before she limped back to Belfast for further repairs. According to the book, this is where it was discovered that the damage to Olympic was actually far greater than anyone imagined. Apparently her keel had been warped, giving her a constant list, and the repairs necessary to correct this would be totally uneconomical. Now by this time she'd only made 4 journeys to and from Southampton to New York, so the White Star Line were facing, at least according to the book, a massive loss here. It was at this time that a plan was hatched to not only replace Olympic with a fully working ship, but also to claim the insurance of a brand new ship. Now all they had to do was swap Olympic with her sister ship Titanic, stage an accident and sink her, and then claim on the insurance. Genius. Olympic and Titanic are almost identical, with the majority of objects being standard White Star issue. The very few items that bore the name of the ship they were on, like lifeboats, bells and nameplates, according to the book could easily be removed and swapped with one another. Once the swap was complete, the plan was then to sink Olympic disguised as Titanic on the way from Southampton to New York. Close to the site chosen to stage the accident was the SS Californian, who was tasked with picking up survivors. However, whilst faking the sinking of Olympic disguised as Titanic, apparently they accidentally sank her. That's quite a fail really. So according to the book, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, There was another ship involved. So we have Olympic disguised as Titanic, we have the Californian that is just round the road, and then we have a third ship, a smaller ship, that apparently crashed into the Olympic. It wasn't an iceberg, it was this third smaller ship. Now, it went off, limping away, and it fired its distress rockets. Now, the Californian that was tasked with picking up survivors saw these distress rockets and was a little confused and was like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And then that's why it didn't come to the help of the Olympic disguised as the Titanic. This is just a massive mess. But apparently, that's what happened according to the book.
Don't they see us? No, sir. There was a light flashing, but it must have come from their masthead.
This conclusion, however, didn't make it into the documentary based on the book, Titanic: The Shocking Truth. I am just burning my money here, aren't I? Anyway, according to the documentary, everything conspiracy-wise is the same up until the collision. Now, the documentary says, yes indeed, it did hit an iceberg, but there was some confusion with the Californian, who was actually there to pick up survivors. It saw another ship that was in distress that it doesn't go into detail what ship it was, but apparently this is where all the confusion happened and why the Californian didn't come to rescue people on the Titanic.
Looked like a rocket, sir.
Yes. I wonder what a ship like that would want to fire rockets for.
Technical issues make the documentary almost unwatchable, and despite being less than an hour long, I really struggled to make it to the end, a lot like the book. Now, it's not helped by the fact that, and this is going to sound really mean, the narrator, Peter Willis, he's an interesting looking gentleman, and to quote my good mate James Gurney, he thinks he looks like an alien wearing a human mask.
Titanic cost $10 million to build, and as a brand new ship would have been insurable for that amount and more. The Olympic, on the other hand, damaged beyond economic repair, would only have been insurable for a much smaller amount. A motive for switching the ships is clear.
Bitchiness aside, there's another thing that you might have noticed in that clip I showed you right there. The audio has all been dubbed over. Now, presumably they had massive issues with their audio, so they had to get Peter Willis back in the studio. But those things combined, his unusual features and this kind of off audio, it has this really uncanny valley kind of esque to it. Is it just me who thinks that? Am I just a horrible person? For all its failings, the documentary does actually a pretty decent job at presenting the evidence put forward by the book that a switch actually took place. Now, some of this evidence is, I'm not going to lie, pretty piss poor, but I've decided to go after what I consider to be the 5 strongest pieces of evidence, and I'm going to debunk them all. So let's start off with number 5.
5.
Olympic and Titanic were practically identical. So, according to both the book and the documentary, Titanic and Olympic were identical, and therefore a switch would have been easy because all you have to do is take a few lifeboats, a few plates, a few bells, and just swap them over. In fact, you could have done it in, and I kid you not, in a weekend, according to the documentary.
Switching the two ships would have been a remarkably simple undertaking. There were no members of the press poking around or roving TV crews looking for a story. Even photography was in its infancy at the time. And generally, people believed what they were told to be the truth. All crockery, linen and so on was White Star standard issue, interchangeable from ship to ship. Letterheads and menus, etc. were styled to the particular ship, but could easily have been changed. Only the names on the bows and sterns of the ships, the nameplates on the lifeboats and 48 lifebelts would have to be swapped. This could easily have been achieved using a very small crew, literally over a weekend. And it's highly unlikely that anyone would have noticed a switch when they returned to work on Monday morning.
At first glance, Olympic and Titanic seem identical. After all, they were constructed from the same set of plans. However, a number of improvements were made to Titanic during Olympic's construction and after her maiden voyage. Many of these differences were structural, meaning that any switch would have to be extensive, time-consuming, and very expensive. For example, the forward half of A deck on Titanic was enclosed with glass screens, whereas Olympic's deck was open. The two ships also have very different spacing between their windows on B deck, which also on Titanic go back further. B deck internally was also drastically different on both ships, with Olympic having a promenade whereas Titanic had rooms that were flush to the side of the ship. As I said, the documentary says that the switch could be done using a handful of men over a couple of days, but to give credit where credit is due, the book actually acknowledges that major changes will be needed, but doesn't go into much detail about these changes or how hard it would be to do or the number of people required to make these changes. No, it doesn't mention any of that, because if it did, it would just all fall apart. Both the documentary and the book mention one thing that apparently those that were tasked with swapping the two ships over totally forgot about, and that is the number of portholes on each ship.
On the forward part of Sea Deck, Olympic was built with 16 portholes. The Titanic with 14. Somewhat mysteriously, the Titanic has acquired 2 extra portholes between its launch and its maiden voyage. This clearly points to the possibility that the two ships were switched.
At launch, Titanic did indeed only have 14 portholes on her port side on Sea Deck. However, in December 1911, during her fit-out, she had 2 added to light crew galleys and a washroom. What's interesting is that this time Olympic also only had 14 portholes, and it was not until March 1912, after the Titanic, that 2 additional portholes were added. Hence why post-Titanic sinking images of Olympic also have this 16 porthole configuration. Now, this part of the conspiracy always confused me, because I think they've missed a perfect opportunity here to convince people that a switch actually took place. I mean, for example, we know that Titanic had 16 portholes when she set sail from Southampton to New York, but just beforehand, Olympic only had 14, and it wasn't until after the sinking that you see Olympic with 16. So you should say that, hey, Titanic had 16, Olympic had 14, but then, whoa, after the switch, suddenly Olympic had 16. That's what you need to do. You've missed a brilliant opportunity there, documentary and book.
4.
Keeping the swap secret. So we all know that actors that star in low-budget documentaries are pretty much never going to win an Oscar anytime soon. However, there is a scene in Titanic: The Shocking Truth that takes this bad acting and turns it up to 11. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, the scene takes place whilst the documentary is trying to describe how so many people could keep this secret. And it stars 2 guys, 2 Irish dock workers in a bar. When one of them starts talking to the other one about how he knows the 2 ships have been swapped, then suddenly this guy grabs him, and it's just marvelous. You have to see it.
There's a wee scam going on here, and the bosses are in on it. They switched those ships 2 weeks ago, and I know it.
Listen to me, Paddy. Any more talk from you about 2 ships being swapped over, and you'll end up at the bottom of the River Lagan. So remember that when you get back to your wife and your 17 kids, you Irish scum.
Do you see what I mean? It's just hilarious. Remember that when you go back to your wife and your 17 kids, you Irish scum. I can imagine them reading the script and being like, okay, how am I going to act this? I know, completely over the top and ridiculous. That's how I'm going to act it. Now, looking past how ridiculously bad this acting is and how jarring this scene is with the rest of the documentary, are we really meant to believe that all the people involved kept this secret to their deathbed? Are we really meant to believe that? Because this is what the documentary and what the book is saying. Now, let's not forget, to make the changes between the two would take a hell of a lot more than a handful of people and a couple of days. You're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of people to make the change. And let's also not forget that the launch of these 2 ships, Titanic, which was, because of her weight, the biggest ship out there, had a lot of press coverage. So there were people from the press who were monitoring all this. Did we keep them secret? What about the people who weren't affiliated with the shipbuilders or the White Star Line, who just lived in Belfast and saw that, hey, why are they making one ship look like the other? Did we keep them secret as well? It's lazy conspiracy 101. When people can't explain how so many people must be kept secret on a massive conspiracy, they just say they've all been paid off or they've all been threatened. It's laziness. And quite frankly, conspiracy theorists, you need to up your game.
3.
Titanic propeller was found at the shipwreck. So you're probably thinking, what? So yeah, if Titanic sank, you'd expect to find her propeller at the shipwreck. Well, not according to the book and documentary.
In order to get the Olympic back to sea and earning a profit as soon as possible, the starboard propeller, stamped with the Titanic's number 401 and not yet fitted to the Titanic, was fitted to the Olympic. This is a fact of some considerable significance, as we shall find out later.
According to them, Olympic's starboard propeller was badly damaged after the collision with the Hawk and needed replacing. When she arrived back at Belfast, all resources were pulled from Titanic in order to return her back to service as soon as possible. To speed up repairs, the decision was made to install a propeller on Olympic that originally was going to be for the Titanic. When the wreck of the Titanic was discovered in 1985, pictures were taken of her starboard propeller and revealed the Titanic's yard number, 401, on the blade. This was the same blade given to Olympic after the accident with the Hawk, and therefore the ship at the bottom of the ocean is not Titanic.
Examination of the starboard propeller reveals the number 01 stamped into the metal. In fairness, there is too much corrosion to make out the number 4 clearly, but remember the starboard propeller, numbered 401 for the Titanic, was put on the Olympic as part of the repairs after the collision with the Hawk.
In reality, the collision with the Hawk damaged Olympic's propeller shaft and not her propeller. A replacement was taken from Titanic, allowing repairs to the Olympic to be finished within 6 weeks. It was a few months after the accident with the Hawk that Olympic damaged one of her propellers, which also needed to be replaced. However, this time they could not simply take Titanic's, as the two ships had different pitch propeller blades. Not that they would need to, because Olympic had spares, like Titanic. In fact, Titanic's spare propeller was turned into memorials. Titanic, on her maiden voyage, was listing to port. According to the book and documentary, after the collision with the Hawk, Olympic was listing to port. And, coincidentally, the ship that left Southampton that was meant to be the Titanic on her maiden voyage was also listing to port. Now this is actually correct, and it's mentioned by survivors of the disaster, and you can also see it in pictures taken of the ship leaving Southampton. It's not unusual for ships even today to have a slight list due to improper balancing. However, Olympic didn't have a list because her keel wasn't warped by the incident with the Hawk. And in fact, she operated for months after the incident with the Hawk and before Titanic's maiden voyage. Conspiracy theorists never talk about this or explain it. For the Switch conspiracy to work, you have to ignore the timing of events and the fact that Olympic was operating for months between her accident and before the damage to her propeller forced her back home to Belfast. It is here where the switch apparently took place, because up until this point, not only was Titanic not complete, but previous repairs to Olympic caused her maiden voyage to be delayed. So, if the accident with the Hawk damaged Olympic's keel so badly that she was unseaworthy, and the Titanic wouldn't be finished for a few months and wouldn't be seaworthy herself, what was making the journey to and from America and England? I don't know.
1.
Letters fall off the shipwreck to reveal the name Olympic. Okay. Right. This one has to be seen to believed. Watch this.
And finally, a close look at the bow could reveal the most damning evidence of all. In 1986, the French National Oceanographic Institute examined the wreck with Dr. Robert Ballard. One of the things they checked was the name of the ship. In keeping with White Star tradition, both ships had their names engraved into the upper bow plates in letters 4 foot high. Examination of the wreck and the name Titanic shows that it is made of iron letters which have been riveted onto the original bow plates. With the passage of time, 2 of the letters have dropped off and been lost forever in the sediment of the seabed. At the place where they once were, engraved into the hull, are the letters M and P.
I mean, yeah, who are they trying to kid? Who are they trying to kid with this really poor CGI? Even poor for the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, they are fabricating evidence. They commissioned someone to make this for this documentary. I mean, I know it's not unusual for conspiracy theorists to fabricate data, but bloody hell, usually they're a lot more competent at it than this. This is, well, I know I say laughable quite a lot when I want to totally have a go at someone, but this is laughable as in I was laughing my bloody arse off watching this, thinking, Come on, guys. Come on, have a bit of respect for yourself.
Normally, White Star Line, when they insured their ships, took on part of the risk themselves, and it was at first thought that Lloyd's of London would only be liable for $7.5 million. Not so. For just 1 week before the maiden voyage of the Titanic, which we now know was in fact the Olympic, White Star Line upped their insurance on the vessel dramatically. And, incredibly, just 5 days after the sinking, Lloyd's paid out $12.5 million.
The final nail on the coffin for this conspiracy is that the ship that set sail that day and sank on the way to New York was underinsured by $2.5 million. Titanic cost approximately $7.5 million to build, yet was only insured for a value of $5 million. This resulted in heavy losses for the company, and I'm not sure how anyone could look at these facts and come to the conclusion that the Titanic was an insurance scam. It's easy to forget when talking about the Titanic that it was an actual disaster, where over 1,500 people lost their lives. And I think a lot of people do forget that. For example, I went to the actual Titanic Museum in Belfast last year, and they had adverts for a Titanic-themed wedding that you could have there in the museum. So first of all, that's kind of on the disrespectful and weird side. Second of all, that's a bad omen if I've ever heard of one. Now, like so many conspiracy theories that are based on historical events, we shouldn't allow these people's history to be rewritten or distorted. And every time something like this pops up, we should whack it down with facts and evidence. Now, according to the book and the documentary, it was the Olympic that sank that night back in 1912. I don't think it is, at least not with the evidence that you've put forward in these two. Right, so I'm gonna go. Goodbye, internet. So here we are at the end of the video, and I just want to say thank you to watching it to the end, and a big thank you to all the people who've been supporting me on Patreon. Because of you guys, I'm able to afford crap like this book and DVD that was the entire basis of this video. So, thank you very much. And remember, if you're a top tier Patreon or whatever you call them, I send you crap in the post. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying that over the last few months. And yep, right, I'm gonna go. So I'll see you guys when I see you next. Goodbye, internet.